The contract was signed as if it were a secret pact. In 1974, Don King, a boxing promoter virtually unknown to the international world, achieved something no one could have imagined, taking Muhammad Ali and George Foreman to fight in the heart of Africa, in Zaire. It wasn't just a sporting decision, it was a political move, an operation calculated to serve interests far greater than boxing. It all began with a bold proposal, sold with the glitter of impossible promises: $6 million for each fighter, paid before they even stepped into the ring. The catch is that no American or European sponsor wanted to risk that much money on an event with so many uncertainties, but Don King knew there was one man willing to bankroll the spectacle: President Mobutu Sese Seko, a dictator who ruled Zaire with an iron fist and wanted to transform that fight into a symbol of global power and prestige. The decisive meeting took place in Kinshasa, in a palace surrounded by armed soldiers. Mobutu spoke of boxing not as a fan, but as a political strategist. He knew that the presence of Ali, the sport's biggest name, and Foreman, the undefeated champion, would attract cameras from around the world to Zaire. For him, the event would be pure propaganda, showcasing his country as modern, strong, and respected on the international stage. Don King, with his calculated smile and spiky hair, promised that this fight would make history and, above all, would put Mobutu's name alongside the most famous men on earth. The president didn't hesitate. He signed the check, and with that, the fate of boxing would change forever. Soon, the city of Kinshasa was transformed into a gigantic stage. Not only the stadium, but entire streets were prepared to welcome tourists, journalists, and TV crews from every continent. Mobutu ordered giant murals painted with the faces of Ali and Foreman, as if they were political leaders or national heroes. The atmosphere was reminiscent of a political circus: siren, flags, marching soldiers, cultural parades, but all carefully choreographed to demonstrate strength and unity. Behind this facade, however, there was an atmosphere of tension. Mobutu was known for eliminating opponents without hesitation, and any slip-up in the organization could cost whoever was in charge dearly. The days leading up to the fight seemed like a never-ending festival. Don King imported artists, organized music shows, and granted journalists exclusive access to the two fighters' training sessions. But there was one order no one dared break: speaking ill of the president was forbidden. Foreign correspondents who attempted to interview dissidents mysteriously disappeared. The regime used the spectacle to stifle any internal criticism, and the local population, even thrilled by Ali's presence, lived between pride and fear. Mobutu deep down didn't care who went for him. Victory was already putting Zaire at the center of the world map, no matter the cost. But something unexpected began to happen. The relationship between Ali and the people of Zaire grew rapidly. While Foreman seemed distant and suspicious, Ali walked the streets, chatted with locals, learned Lingala expressions, and even ate traditional foods with his hands. Like them, chants of Ali, Boma the Ali, kill him, began to echo through the streets days before the fight. This quietly irritated some members of the government, who preferred to focus on the magnitude of the event rather than on a single man. Don King, for his part, smiled as if he knew he was creating a bigger spectacle than expected, but also felt the weight of dealing with a country where one mistake could cost one's life. And then, a rumor began to circulate behind the scenes. A European journalist claimed that there was a political group within Zaire that viewed the millions of dollars spent as an insult, while the people suffered extreme poverty. It was a silent but real tension that made it clear that the fight wasn't just about boxing, it was about power, control, and image. Don King, realizing that the situation could get out of hand, decided to keep every detail of the event under strict surveillance. Even hotel reservations were controlled by government officials. No one entered or left Kinshasa without being monitored. When the sun set, the city's tone changed. During the day, it was a party. At night, there was silence, with military patrols. On the street corners, foreign journalists commented in the corridors of the Intercontinental Hotel about the regime's invisible eyes. Don King pretended not to worry, but he knew any misstep could jeopardize the entire event. There, on the other side, he used the situation to his advantage. He transformed his training sessions into public spectacles, inviting people to watch, winning hearts, and creating an atmosphere that would make the arena tremble on fight day. Stage was set, but there was something in the air no one could explain. Perhaps it was the mixture of fear and euphoria. Perhaps it was the sense that this would not just be a boxing match, but a chapter in African political history. And in the center of it all, Don King smiled, believing he was in control. imagining that soon he, too, would have to face forces far greater than any ring, and it was just the beginning. The fight date was set, but a twist threatened to derail the entire spectacle. George Foreman suffered a deep cut above his eye during training. The doctor ordered him to stay out for weeks. For Don King, this was like hearing a death sentence for the event. Each day of delay cost money, increased tension, and gave time for criticism of the millions spent on the fight to gain traction within Zaire. Mobutu accepted no excuses. He wanted the show, and he wanted it now. But he also knew that, without Foreman, there would be no reason for the cameras to keep rolling. The solution was to postpone the fight for a month but keep both fighters in the country. This meant weeks of confinement under surveillance, in a territory where everything had an owner, and the owner was the president. This delay completely changed the atmosphere. Journalists began to realize they were in a controlled bubble. Their credentials weren't valid everywhere. There were areas of Kinshasa they simply couldn't enter. Mobutu's secret police monitored every step, every conversation. It was impossible not to notice that, behind the music and the shows, the country lived under an authoritarian regime. Foreman's cut became a secondary issue in the stifling atmosphere. There, however, he seemed to thrive in this environment. He mingled with the people, went to markets, made jokes, trained outdoors. Foreman, on the other hand, withdrew even further into himself, training in silence, suspicious of everyone, even Don King. Don King, ever calculating, decided to turn the delay into a new spectacle. He organized parties, cultural performances, exclusive interviews, and even a street race with Oli present. The goal was simple: to keep the world's attention on Zaire. Meanwhile, Mobutu reinforced domestic propaganda. Government-controlled newspapers published daily articles extolling the event, as if it were the country's greatest achievement since independence. There was no mention of the exorbitant spending, much less the poverty that continued to crush the majority of the population. But in the hotel corridors, conversations among foreigners were quite different. African correspondents whispered that many saw the money as an insult, an act of vanity on the president's part. Some feared that any failure in the organization would be interpreted as a betrayal. The pressure on Don King was growing. He knew failure was not an option, not just because of the money, but because he was dealing with a leader who did not forgive mistakes. For Oli, that extra time was pure gold. He studied Foreman from afar, observing his behavior, noticing that the champion was impatient, uncomfortable, and mentally isolated. On the streets, the cry of Ali, Boma, grew louder and more frequent. It was almost a national mantra. Foreman began training surrounded by security, avoiding contact with the public, which only heightened the feeling that he was the cold foreigner against his African brother Ali. When the new date for the battle was finally announced, the tension was palpable. Mobutu ordered the entire country to treat the day as a national celebration. Businesses would close, schools would be closed, and radio stations would broadcast the event live. But there was one detail few knew. To ensure security, he ordered that if there was any sign of unrest, the armed forces would intervene immediately. This included, according to rumors, ensuring that the final outcome would be favorable to the country's image no matter the cost. And Pogue, to complete the political soap opera atmosphere, a story began circulating among journalists. Don King, in private meetings, had allegedly promised exclusive perks to European sponsors in exchange for extra financial support. This angered American businessmen, who felt betrayed. Amid an already charged situation, the possibility now emerged that the fight outside the ring would be as intense as the one inside. The countdown to the event was ticking, but no one was sleeping soundly. In the air, there was not only anticipation for one of the greatest fights in boxing history, there was the feeling that any spark could transform Zaire from a stage into a battlefield. And if you're hooked on this story so far, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This fight wasn't just about punches and knockouts, it was about survival, politics, and a power play the likes of which the world rarely dares to reveal. What no one imagined was that, on the day of the fight, one detail would change everything. The stadium began to fill up while it was still dark. The floodlights cut through the early morning humidity, and outside, soldiers controlled each entrance with stern looks. It was fight day, and Kinshasa vibrated as if the heart of the country beat within that ring. By direct order from the palace, everything was timed, traffic blocked, radios lined up, cameras positioned. Because of international broadcasts, the gong would sound before dawn. People walked the streets repeating a chorus that had become a banner. Oli Boma, the The sound came in waves, mixed with drums and hurried footsteps. At the hotel, Don King adjusted his tie, sweating beneath his suit. He knew this was no mere spectacle. It was a public act of the regime. Any malfunction, any delay, any failure would be met with coldness. Under strict command, technicians whispered codes. Any setback became a whisper on the radio. The order was not to fail, not to hesitate, to breathe in unison. Ali, behind the scenes, the watchword was redundancy. 2 extra generators roared in. Case of a power outage. Technicians checked cables, microphones, and lenses as if they were staging a surgical operation. Don King moved between broadcasters, smiling at some and pressuring others. There were rumors of bribes for camera time, of silent fights for prominent ringside positions. At the same time, the government hemmed in journalists with invisible rules. No showing poor neighborhoods, no questions about disappearances, nothing that would shatter the fantasy of prosperity. The circus had a tent, spotlights, and a single agenda: grandeur. Sound trucks, flash parades, fluttering flags. The entire city seemed choreographed, as if every step were rehearsed for a film with a mandatory uplifting ending. Under strict command, technicians whispered codes. Any mishap became a whisper. The order was to not fail, not hesitate, to breathe. In unison, Ali entered the stadium ahead of schedule, like someone inaugurating a house. He greeted security, waved to the stands, tapped the ropes, smiled at children on their parents' shoulders. He transformed the ring into a stage, and the stage into a square. A foreman arrived later, surrounded by curious gazers and hungry cameras. His face remained closed, his steps slow, a stony silence. When the two crossed paths, the arena breathed more deeply. Ollie spoke something low, almost intimate. Foreman didn't respond. The audience took sides without consultation. In the locker rooms, coaches discussed the weight of the gloves, the softness of the ropes, the distance between the corners. Government emissaries were observing everything, noting times, testing microphones. It seemed as if even the air was subject to authorization. Ollie joked. Foreman counted the seconds. 2 worlds colliding in the same square. And the rumor went around that the ideal result would be the one that preserved the country's image. No one spoke loudly, but everyone felt eyes on every corner of the arena. It is 4 o'clock sharp. The stadium silenced its drums to hear its own silence. The cameras focused on the center where the referee was checking gloves and looks. Around them, men in suits and radios whispered orders, while rows of soldiers guarded the passages. The anthem echoed, and for a moment the entire city seemed suspended in mid-air. Don King walked to the edge of the ring with a broad smile, but his clenched hand betrayed the fear of someone who knows any mistake will make headlines. Ollie tapped lightly on the ropes, testing their elasticity. Foreman rotated his shoulders. Like a heavy engine, when the referee called the center, the arena leaned forward. 2 faces, 2 stories, 2 projects of power. Ali performed the ritual of touching foreheads, whispering something only his opponent heard. The referee explained the rules in short sentences. The bell finally rose into the air. In the first exchange of glances, the stadium lights seemed focused on the fists. The audience didn't blink. The country held its breath. The bell rang, and for a second, no one reacted. It was as if the city was waiting for the first clue of fate. Ali took a short step forward, raised his guard, and smiled. Foreman responded with a measured, heavy jab that sliced through the air. Bodies began to converse before words could be spoken. Ali spun, calling out to his rival. Foreman advanced like a wall. The chants shouted instructions, and the crowd became a sea. All around, government officials evaluated contingency plans and emergency exits. The fight was political, economic, and media-driven. It was a real-time portrait of strength and narrative. Ollie knew he had to survive the opening minutes. Foreman wanted to command respect in the first exchange of strikes. When they touched the clinch, for a moment, the entire stadium seemed to shrink, and there began the strategy that would change history, without anyone immediately realizing it. The next round wouldn't just be boxing, it would be a decision. The secret was in the ropes. In the next round, everything would be clear. Ollie pressed his back against the ropes, as if defying his own body's gravity. Foreman's first blows came like sledgehammers, hitting his torso, his arms, his pride. With each impact, the stadium roared, like a trapped animal, and yet Ollie smiled, chatted, taunted, held his rival's neck in the clinch, and whispered, "Is that all?" Outside, drums responded to the rhythm of the ring. Inside, cameras tracked the sweat glistening under hastily erected spotlights. Don King watched from the sidelines, calculating angles, headlines, and figures, while uniformed officials lined up like a stage set of power. The circus was complete. Giant posters, dancers, announcers, flashbulbs. But behind it, an entire country held its breath under the palace's orders. Ollie let his shoulders drop, bent his knees, pressed his back against the elastic. He seemed to be being beaten to measure. He seemed to retreat to choose the moment. Foreman hit beautifully for the camera and hard for the soul. It was just the beginning. Foreman bit down on the pad and doubled his hooks. Each blow seemed to knock a breath out of Ollie, but there was method in the discomfort. On the ropes, his relaxed body absorbed the impact. His chin was safe. His eyes remained alert. Ollie spoke to the audience, to his rival, and to the stopwatch. "You missed harder, command." The chant of Ollie Boma that grew like a tide, pushing from the outside in. In the box, regime officials maintained their stony posture, but their sweat betrayed fear of a global network failure. Technicians protected cables, generators, and antennas like jewels. A logistical misstep would turn into political humiliation. Don King floated between press tables, smiling and demanding, while the stadium vibrated like a transformer at its limit. Foreman pushed, tested, imposed mass. Ollie, in turn, diffused the impact with centimeters and silence. Nothing could fail. The arena noticed Foreman's shoulders first. They dropped half an inch every minute, as if an invisible backpack were being filled with stone. Long punches used up air. Tense arms demanded tribute. The clock, Ollie's secret ally, gnawed at the champion's strength with small, constant teeth. With each combination that sliced through the void, time stole a second. Each clinch, Ollie breathed, leaned in, spoke. "It's tiring. It's going to wear off. I'm still here." Don King scratched his chin and sniffed out a comeback. In the hotels, editors in different time zones lined up headlines. In the hallways, palace messengers walked through doors with security messages. The fight was also a risk report broadcast. Live, time became a weapon. There was more at stake than a belt. Foreign delegations occupied seats of honor. Businessmen made promises in the shadows. Investors canvassed concessions. The fight was a showcase for a country that wanted to sell stability and power. Mobutu watched motionless, as if a blink could be interpreted. Around him, posters extolled the government, and cameras avoided any straying from the script. Meanwhile, Ali executed his survival choreography, blocking, gluing, locking, releasing. He tested his rival's timing like someone measuring the distance of a lightning bolt. Foreman persisted, because champions don't back down without an answer, but the right answer never came. In the corner, the trainer shouted, "Protect your body, lengthen the jab, don't take the bait," and the bait, discreet, was everywhere. The showcase could shatter. The round turned, and the air changed. Ali stepped off the ropes for seconds, landing 3 short, crisp, clean blows, and then returned to the elastic shelter. It wasn't an escape, it was an invitation. Foreman accepted immediately, driven by pride. His hands grew heavy, his steps stiffened, his breathing rasped. The cameras caught a rare glimpse, doubt in the champion's eyes. Don King noticed, Mobutu Sese politics held its breath, and boxing took up the script. Ollie tilted his head, measured the distance, and muttered something only his rival heard. The entire stadium tilted with it, as if the stands might fall into the ring. In that instant, the rope ceased to be a shelter and became a catapult. The next blow would change everything. The blow sounded like a sentence. Foreman opened his guard for a moment, and Ollie unleashed short, sharp hooks, stitching the champion's jawline until his body lost its axis. A final straight punch pushed the knight into his eyes. Foreman's legs searched for the floor and found none. The stadium held its breath, then exploded. Ali Boma became a wall of sound. The referee began the count, and as the numbers fell, the camera closed on Ollie's face. Sweat.com Control 8 9 10. It was over. The ring shrank to a square of history. Don King raised his arms as if presenting a work of art. Mobutu, in the box, maintained his granite pose. The official message would be simple and powerful. Zaire was the stage for the impossible, and the world had to look at it. The rest police on street corners, censored newspapers, bleeding public accounts would remain outside the frame. Ollie was carried by the crowd before being surrounded by security. Government officials opened human corridors to monitor the triumph. Reporters fought for inches, microphones, and phrases. Ollie only said what he needed to: respect for his rival, gratitude to the people, pride in having won where he felt at home, At the same time, agents passed notes between producers, confirming interview times, exclusive lines, the text that would be preferable to repeat. The fight had an owner in the ring, the narrative, in the palace. Foreman emerged supported by arms that seemed too frail for the weight of a champion. There were no boos, there was silence. It was the silence that the great rarely hear when strength meets the wall of time. And time, that early morning, spoke with an African accent and the echo of a drum. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was like a contract fair. Advertisers were closing deals, television stations were stamping reruns, radio stations were exchanging signatures for live interviews. Don King, electric, offered smiles, but demanded deadlines, checked figures, and protected the product that had just achieved the impossible. His engineering had worked, money up front, a government hungry for prestige, two colossuses in the same square, a capital decorated to become a global postcard. The city had become a stage, the people, an audience, the palace, a director's booth. It was a circus, but not a children's circus. It was a state circus, with a canvas tent and a concrete floor. Ali's strategy touched the ropes. Swallow the hurricane, return in due time served politics better than any slogan. The world applauded the fight. Mobutu applauded himself, and Don King noted that, from that point on, boxing could be geopolitics. With gloves on, Kinshasa woke up to torn posters, confetti stuck to the wet asphalt, and stories whispered from the local newspapers had impeccable headlines. National pride, Zaire on top of the world, Africa is great. Nothing about opponents arrested during the week of the event. Nothing about public values buried in the stadium's grass. As trucks removed scaffolding, families echoed the chorus from the stands and children imitated the pullback on the ropes. The city gained new memories, those that fit on camera. The rest remained out of focus. At night, in the hotels, correspondents finally wrote what they saw. The beauty of a people who adopted a man and the harshness of a regime that used that love as a showcase. Some texts never aired, others were broken, edited, delayed. The show ends on stage, the contracts remain in the office. Days later, the dollars began to find their destinations. Some disappeared into the maze of the state, some became payments to those who provided electricity, security, and transportation. Some became souvenirs, posters, records, broadcasts. Don King returned home with the recognition he needed, Mobutu with a perfect photograph, Ali with a victory that wasn't just his, and Foreman with the question all giants carry after their fall: where did the body say enough? Zaire in turn earned a beautiful scar. Those who observe from afar see brilliance, those who lived up close know that brilliance is sometimes a veneer over cracks. The fight became known as an epic, the setting as an enigma, because the ring was honest from the bell to 10. But the surroundings never were. And it is precisely there that this story leaves its mark on the hearts of those who watched. In the end, that Don taught us things that aren't confined to sports. It taught us that a victory can be both technical and political, that a people can love a hero and still remain silent, that spectacle isn't reality, it's a cut. It taught us that courage can use ropes as a shield, that patience overcomes weight, that time is a weapon when the mind doesn't sink into the noise, and it reminded us that cameras aren't neutral. They point where power desires, cut where power dictates, magnify what power needs to show. The Kinshasa ring wasn't just a Don Ali knocked out Foreman. It was the night a country tried to knock down its own shadow with borrowed lights. For some, it worked. For others, it revealed an even larger shadow. Perhaps the hardest lesson is this: whenever the circus tent covers the square, it's worth looking at the poles, the exits, who counts the money, who controls the music, because fights pass, narratives remain, and it is in them that, often, history knocks out the truth.